The sun cast long shadows across Wallace, Idaho Territory. 1879. As Katherine Jenkins stepped off the stagecoach, her 38-year-old bones aching from the arduous journey. She smoothed down her plain blue traveling dress, feeling conspicuously out of place among the rough-hewn frontier town with its muddy main street and weathered wooden buildings. Clutched in her gloved hand was a crumpled letter from Beau Weston, a young rancher who had advertised for a mail-order bride, never knowing the woman who would answer was nearly 15 years his senior. Katherine's heart hammered against her ribs as she scanned the crowd. How would he react when he saw her? She had been honest about everything in her letters except her age, a small deception that now loomed large as mountains on the horizon. There he stood, tall and lean, 23 years young with a shock of sandy hair beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His eyes, clear as creek water, searched the disembarking passengers. Katherine felt her courage falter. The weight of her trunk at her feet seemed to anchor her to the spot as surely as the weight of her deception. Beau spotted her, the only unaccompanied woman of the group. He approached with long, confident strides, his expression open and expectant. "Miss Jenkins?" he asked, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. Katherine nodded, unable to find her voice for a moment. "Mr. Weston, it's a pleasure to finally meet you." She extended her hand, which he took gently. His eyes flickered with momentary confusion as he took in her appearance, the threads of silver in her auburn hair, the fine lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of years lived and sorrows weathered. "You look different than I expected," he said plainly, the forthrightness of youth evident in his words. Katherine summoned her courage. "I should have been more forthcoming in my letters, Mr. Weston. I am 38 years old. If that changes your mind about our arrangement, I understand completely. I have enough money for return passage." Beau's expression was unreadable for a long moment. The bustling activity of the stagecoach depot continued around them, but Katherine felt as though they stood alone in a bubble of tense silence. Then he surprised her. "Then you can teach me how to love right," he said, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "I reckon there's wisdom in years that I could use." Katherine blinked, uncertain if she had heard him correctly. "You're not disappointed?" Beau shrugged. "Madam, I've been alone on that ranch with no one but my foreman and a few hands for company. I advertised for a wife because I need a partner, not just a pretty face to look at." He gestured to her trunk. "May I?" As he lifted her heavy trunk with ease, Katherine felt something shift inside her, a flicker of hope where there had been only resignation. "My wagon's this way," Beau said, leading her through the bustle of Wallace's Main Street. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch. I hope you don't mind dust." Katherine smiled. "Mr. Weston, I've come all the way from Boston. I believe I've had my fair share of dust these past weeks." The ride to Beau's ranch gave Katherine time to observe the young man who had agreed to marry her despite their age difference. His hands were strong and calloused, his face weathered beyond his years from working outdoors. Yet there was a gentleness in how he handled the horses, a consideration in how he helped her up to the wagon seat. "Why did you answer my advertisement?" he asked as they left the town behind, the mountains rising majestically before them. Katherine considered her answer carefully. "I was a governess for 15 years. The children grew up. Their parents died. There was no place left for me when I saw your advertisement." She paused. "I've always wanted a home of my own." Beau nodded. "Honest answer, I appreciate that. And you? Why advertise for a wife rather than court a local girl?" A shadow passed over his features. "Not many young women want to marry a man with nothing but debt and dreams. My pa died 3 years ago, left me the ranch and all its problems. I've been working to make it profitable, but it's a hard road. The women around here know that. Katherine understood then. They were both outcasts in their own way, she too old by society's standards, he too poor and determined. The ranch came into view as they crested a small rise. It wasn't grand, but it had good bones, a modest two-story house with a wide porch, a large barn, and several outbuildings. Pastures stretched out on either side, dotted with cattle. "It's not much," Beau said, a note of apology in his voice. "It's beautiful," Katherine replied honestly. After a lifetime in other people's homes, the humble ranch looked like paradise. Beau helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk to the porch. "I figured we'd get to know each other a bit before making things official. There's a spare room upstairs for you." His cheeks colored slightly. "I want to do right by you, Miss Jenkins." Katherine was touched by his consideration. "Thank you, Mr. Weston. I appreciate that." He showed her to a small but clean bedroom with a window overlooking the mountains. "My mother's quilts," he explained, nodding to the colorful bedspread. "She passed when I was 14. "I'm sorry," Katherine said softly. "It was a long time ago." He lingered in the doorway. "I'll let you get settled. Supper's at 6. Nothing fancy, I'm afraid. My cooking's passable at best." After he left, Katherine sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. She had expected rejection, not acceptance. She had prepared herself for humiliation, not consideration. Perhaps, just perhaps, she had found what she had been seeking all along. Supper was simple but hearty: beef stew and biscuits that were indeed passable at best. The dining room was sparsely furnished, suggesting that Beau had sold some pieces to keep the ranch afloat. They ate in relative silence at first, the unfamiliarity between them creating a natural barrier. "Tell me about Boston," Beau finally said, breaking the silence. Katherine described her life there: the narrow streets, the bustle of commerce, the weight of tradition that had ultimately stifled her. "It sounds confining," Beau observed. "It was in many ways. Particularly for a woman of my circumstances." Katherine hesitated before adding, "My fiancé died in the war. After that, options were limited." Beau's eyes registered understanding. "The Civil War took many good men." "Yes, Robert was one of them." It had been years since she had spoken his name aloud. "After that, I became a governess. It was a respectable position for a woman alone." "But not what you wanted," Katherine smiled sadly. "We don't always get what we want, Mr. Weston." "Beau," he corrected gently. "If we're considering marriage, you might as well use my given name." "Beau," she repeated. "And I'm Katherine." "Katherine," he echoed, and the sound of her name in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. After supper, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of gold and pink. The vastness of the landscape made Katherine feel small yet somehow free. "It's different from anything I've known," she admitted. "The territory's harsh but fair," Beau replied. "Judges a person by their mettle, not their past or their age." He glanced at her, gauging her reaction. Katherine appreciated his directness. "You're very young, Beau. 23 if I recall from your letters. I'm nearly twice that. Most would consider that inappropriate." He shrugged. "Most aren't living my life. I need someone steady, someone who knows her own mind. The young girls around here." He trailed off, then continued with renewed determination. "I watched my father struggle after my mother died. He didn't know how to keep a house, how to cook or mend or make a place feel like home. I don't want that life. And you think I can provide those things? I think you've lived enough to know what matters. That's worth more than youth." His simple wisdom surprised her. Perhaps there was more to this young rancher than she had initially thought. The following days established a tentative routine. Katherine rose early, preparing breakfast before Beau returned from his morning chores. She spent her days cleaning the neglected house, taking inventory of supplies, and beginning to transform the bachelor dwelling into a home. Beau worked from sunup to sundown, returning tired but always taking time to share the events of his day. Katherine found herself looking forward to their evening conversations, to watching his face animate as he described a difficult calving or a successful negotiation with a cattle buyer. A week after her arrival, Katherine was hanging curtains she had sewn from fabric purchased in Wallace when she heard riders approaching. Looking out, she saw Beau greeting 3 men, one older with a graying beard, the others closer to Beau's age. Moments later, Beau called up the stairs. "Katherine, could you come down? There are some folks I'd like you to meet." She smoothed her hair and apron before descending to the main room where the men stood awkwardly, hats in hand. "This is Miss Katherine Jenkins," Beau introduced, a note of pride in his voice that touched her. "Katherine, this is Sam Miller, my foreman, and his sons Daniel and Thomas. They work the north section of the ranch." Sam Miller gave her a respectful nod. "Madam, good to finally meet you. The boss has been talking about your arrival for weeks." Katherine smiled. "It's a pleasure to meet you all. Would you care for coffee? I just made a fresh pot." The invitation broke the ice, and soon the men were seated at the kitchen table while Katherine served coffee and the apple pie she had baked that morning. She noticed the surprised looks exchanged between the Millers at the homey touches she had already added to the ranch house curtains at the windows. Flowers on the table, the spotless condition of rooms that had clearly been neglected. "This is mighty fine pie, Miss Jenkins," Sam said appreciatively. "Been a while since we had home cooking like this around here." "Thank you, Mr. Miller, and please call me Katherine." She caught Beau watching her, a small smile playing at his lips. When their eyes met, he didn't look away, and something warm and unfamiliar fluttered in her chest. After the Millers departed, Beau lingered in the kitchen, helping her wash the dishes, a task Katherine suspected he had rarely undertaken before her arrival. "They liked you," he said, drying a plate with more concentration than the task required. "They seem like good men. They are. Loyal. Stayed on when others left after my father died, even when I couldn't always pay them on time." He set the plate down carefully. "Sam asked if we'd set a date yet." Katherine's hands stilled in the soapy water. "What did you tell him?" "That we were getting to know each other first, that I wanted to do right by you." He paused. "What do you think, Katherine? It's been a week. Do you think you could be happy here with me?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Katherine considered the life she had led and the life that might be possible here, not a governess but a wife, not a guest in another's home but mistress of her own. And Beau. He was young, yes, but thoughtful and hardworking. There was a steadiness to him that belied his years. In just a week, she had come to admire his determination, his quiet strength. "I think I could," she said softly. "But Beau, are you certain? The difference in our ages," he took her wet hands in his, surprising her. "Katherine, I've spent my life watching men make poor choices in wives' pretty faces with no substance, or worse, women who couldn't handle the hardships of ranch life. When I placed that advertisement, I was looking for a partner. In just a week, you've made this place more of a home than it's been since my mother died." His grip tightened. "I don't care that you're older. I care that you're here, that you're strong, that you understand what building a life together means." Katherine felt tears prick at her eyes. "No one has ever valued me for those things before." "Then they were fools," Beau said simply. 2 days later, they rode to Wallace together to speak with the minister. Reverend Howard, a kindly man in his 60s, received them in the small church that served the growing community. "Marriage is a sacred commitment," he said after hearing their situation. "Not to be entered into lightly or without proper consideration." "We understand that, Reverend," Beau assured him. The older man's eyes rested on Katherine. "Miss Jenkins, I must ask, are you entering this union of your own free will and with full understanding?" "I am," Katherine replied firmly. "Mr. Weston has been entirely forthright about his circumstances and I about mine." The minister nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Then I see no impediment. I can perform the ceremony next Sunday after services, if that suits you both." As they left the church, Katherine felt a curious mixture of anxiety and anticipation. They would be married in just 5 days. The prospect was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. Beau must have sensed her thoughts. "Having second thoughts?" he asked as they walked toward the general store. "Not second thoughts, just acknowledging the magnitude of what we're doing," he nodded. "I've been thinking, we should get you a proper ring. Nothing fancy, but something that shows this is a real marriage, not just an arrangement." The thoughtfulness of his suggestion warmed her. "Beau, that's not necessary. I know funds are tight for the ranch. It's necessary to me," he interrupted gently. "Please let me do this." At the general store, Mr. Simmons showed them a small selection of simple gold bands. Beau selected one with a modest garnet stone, the deep red catching the light as he held it up. "This one," he said decisively, "if it suits you." Katherine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat as Beau paid for the ring. It was a small gesture, perhaps, but one that spoke volumes about his intentions. Word of their impending marriage spread quickly through Wallace and the surrounding ranches. Katherine was working in the garden the next day when a wagon pulled up, carrying 2 women, one middle-aged, the other perhaps 30. "Miss Jenkins," the older woman called. "I'm Margaret Parker. This is my daughter, Ruth. We heard about the wedding and thought you might appreciate some female company." Katherine welcomed them gratefully. Over tea, she learned that Margaret was the wife of a successful rancher whose property bordered Beau's land to the east. "Beau Weston is a fine young man," Margaret said approvingly. "His father was a good friend to my husband. We were pleased to hear he'd found himself a wife. The right woman can make all the difference in a man's fortunes." Ruth, more direct than her mother, addressed the elephant in the room. "People are talking about the age difference," she said bluntly. "But I told them it's nobody's business but yours. Any fool can see the ranch is running better already with you here." Katherine appreciated her candor. "Thank you, Ruth. It's not a conventional match, I know." "Convention is overrated," Margaret declared. "My sister married a man 12 years her junior after her first husband died. They've been happy for 15 years now. It's character that matters in a marriage, not the date on a birth certificate." Their visit was the first of several. The next day brought Ellen Miller, Sam's wife, with a basket of preserves and practical advice about maintaining a household through the harsh Idaho winters. The day after that, several women from town arrived with fabric for a wedding dress, insisting on helping Katherine create something special for the ceremony. Katherine was overwhelmed by their generosity. She had expected judgment or ostracism. Instead, she found a community of women who valued practicality and resilience over social conventions. Beau noticed the change in her as the wedding approached a growing confidence, a sense of belonging that hadn't been there before. "You're settling in," he observed as they sat on the porch after supper 3 days before the wedding. "Your neighbors have been very welcoming. They're good people. They look after their own," he hesitated, "and you're one of us now." The simple declaration touched her deeply. One of us. For someone who had spent her adult life as an outsider, not family, not friend, but employee, the sense of belonging was precious beyond words. The wedding day dawned clear and cool, a perfect early autumn Sunday. Katherine stood in the small room at the back of the church. Wearing the dress the women had helped her create, a deep blue silk with modest lace trim, far more elegant than anything she had owned before. Margaret Parker helped arrange her hair, securing it with combs borrowed from Ruth. "Something borrowed," she said with a wink. "For luck." Ellen Miller presented her with a handkerchief edged in delicate crochet work. "I made this for you, something new." Katherine blinked back tears. "You've all been so kind, I don't know how to thank you." "Be happy," Ellen said simply. "That's thanks enough." The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Katherine would forever remember the look in Beau's eyes as she walked toward him, wonder mixed with certainty, as though he was simultaneously amazed by and completely sure of their decision. "I, Beau, take thee, Katherine." His voice was steady, his hands warm around hers. When it came her turn, Katherine's voice trembled slightly, but her resolve was firm. "I, Katherine, take thee, Beau." Reverend Howard pronounced them husband and wife with obvious approval, and Beau's kiss was gentle but sure, a promise of things to come. The celebration afterward was held at the Parker Ranch, the closest large property with space to accommodate the surprisingly numerous well-wishers. Katherine found herself surrounded by people who seemed genuinely happy for them, who treated her not as an oddity but as a welcome addition to their community. "Mrs. Weston," Beau said later, testing the name as they drove home in the wagon adorned with ribbons by some of the younger ranch hands. "How does it sound?" "Unfamiliar," Katherine admitted, "but not unwelcome." He reached for her hand. "I meant what I said in my vows, Katherine. I'll do everything in my power to be a good husband to you." "And I to be a good wife." She hesitated. "Beau, about tonight." His cheeks colored slightly, but his gaze remained steady. "We'll take things as they come. There's no rush." His consideration touched her deeply. Many men would have insisted on their marital rights immediately, especially after the expense and public commitment of a wedding. Beau's willingness to give her time spoke volumes about his character. When they reached the ranch, Beau surprised her by lifting her from the wagon and carrying her across the threshold of their home. "For luck," he explained with a shy smile. That night in the bedroom they would now share, Katherine's nervousness was tempered by Beau's gentle patience. He seemed content to hold her, to talk quietly about their future plans, to let intimacy develop naturally between them. "I want you to be comfortable," he whispered. "We have time." Katherine felt a surge of gratitude, and something deeper, a tenderness for this young man who had chosen her above all others, who saw value in her experience rather than shame in her age. Their physical relationship developed gradually over the following days, tentative touches becoming more confident, kisses deepening, until their marriage was complete in every sense. Katherine, who had feared her age would make her unattractive or undesirable, found instead that Beau's admiration was genuine and his passion real. "You're beautiful," he told her one night as moonlight streamed through their window. "I wish you could see yourself through my eyes." The autumn days settled into a comfortable rhythm. Katherine managed the household with an efficiency born of years of experience, while Beau focused on the ranch operations with renewed vigor, buoyed by the stability their partnership provided. In November, the first heavy snow blanketed the land, transforming the landscape into a pristine white wilderness. Katherine stood at the kitchen window, watching Beau and the hands clearing paths to the barn. "First winter on the ranch," Sam's wife Ellen observed, having stopped by with fresh eggs. "They can be harsh, but there's a beauty to them." "I've never seen so much open space," Katherine admitted. "In Boston, the buildings block the horizon. Here it feels like you can see forever." Ellen nodded. "Takes some getting used to. The isolation can be difficult, especially when the snow makes travel impossible." "I don't mind being isolated with Beau," Katherine said, surprising herself with her candor. Ellen smiled knowingly. Marriage suits you both. I told Sam just the other day that young man stands straighter since you came. There's purpose in his step now. The observation warmed Katherine more than the crackling fire in the hearth. She had noticed changes in Beau too, a growing confidence, a willingness to share his thoughts and concerns rather than shouldering them alone. That evening, as they sat before the fire, Beau revealed a plan he had been considering. I've been thinking about expanding the herd next spring. The south pasture could support another 50 head, and beef prices are rising. Katherine listened as he outlined his ideas, offering occasional suggestions based on the household accounts she now maintained meticulously. Their discussions had become a nightly ritual, Beau sharing his vision for the ranch, Katherine providing practical insights from her years of managing large households on limited budgets. "What do you think?" he asked when he had finished explaining. "I think it's a sound plan," she replied. "But we should set aside more for winter feed than you've calculated. Better to be cautious." Beau nodded, making a note. "This is what I needed," he said after a moment. "Someone to think alongside me, not just agree with everything." "Is that what the local girls would have done?" Katherine teased gently. "The few I knew would have nodded and smiled, then asked when we could next go to town for ribbons," he said with a chuckle. "You ask about cattle futures and hay prices." "How romantic," she replied dryly. Beau's expression grew serious. "It is to me. You care about what matters to me. That's worth more than pretty words or fluttering eyelashes." He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "When I said you could teach me how to love right, I didn't know how true that would be. You've taught me that love isn't just feeling, it's doing, working together, building something that lasts." Katherine felt tears prick at her eyes. "I've learned too," she admitted. "After Robert died, I thought that part of my life was over. I never expected to find love again, certainly not with someone like you." "Someone young and foolish?" he asked with a wry smile. "Someone who sees me, really sees me as I am." December brought the harshest weather Katherine had ever experienced, bitter cold that seeped through the walls despite the blazing fires they maintained day and night. Beau worked tirelessly to keep the cattle fed and watered, often returning so exhausted he could barely eat before falling into bed. Katherine worried about him, about the strain he was under. The ranch was profitable but precarious. One bad winter, one disease outbreak among the herd could undo all their progress. Her opportunity to help came unexpectedly. A letter arrived from Wallace, addressed to her from a Mrs. Eleanor Bennett, widow of a banker in Boise. The woman explained that she had heard of Katherine's skill as a governess from mutual acquaintances in Boston, and inquired whether she would consider tutoring Mrs. Bennett's granddaughter, who was visiting for the winter. "It would be 3 days a week in town," Katherine told Beau that evening. "The pay is generous." Beau frowned. "You don't need to work, Katherine, we're managing." "But we could do more than manage," she pressed gently. "The extra money could go toward those improvements you've been planning for the south pasture." He was quiet for a long moment. "I should be able to provide for us without you having to work." Katherine recognized the pride in his voice, the young man's need to prove himself. "Beau, a marriage is a partnership. Let me contribute in ways I can. You already do so much here, and I'll continue to. Mrs. Bennett only needs me during the day, 3 days a week. I can arrange everything here before I leave and be back by supper." She could see him wrestling with the idea, tradition warring with practicality. "Your father managed alone," she said softly, "but he didn't thrive. We can do better together." Finally, Beau nodded. "If it's what you want, but the moment it becomes too much, you'll tell me, I promise." The arrangement proved beneficial beyond the financial aspect. Katherine enjoyed using her teaching skills again, and the connections she made in Wallace brought new opportunities for both of them. Mrs. Bennett's brother-in-law was a cattle buyer from Montana who, upon meeting Katherine at a small dinner party, expressed interest in doing business with Beau. "Your wife speaks highly of your operation," the man told Beau when they met. "Says you're running Hereford Cross with good results." Beau shot Katherine a surprised look. She had listened more carefully to his ranching talk than he realized. The resulting deal provided the financial cushion they needed to implement Beau's expansion plans come spring. More importantly, it demonstrated to Beau that Katherine's presence in his life enhanced rather than diminished his standing in the community. Winter gradually released its grip on the land. The days lengthened, snow began to melt, and the first signs of green appeared in the pastures. Katherine's tutoring position concluded with the departure of Mrs. Bennett's granddaughter back to boys, but the connections she had established remained valuable. One evening in early April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Beau reached for Katherine's hand. "I've been thinking," he began. "A dangerous pastime," she teased. He smiled. "I want to make some changes to the house. The eastern side gets good morning light. It would make a fine nursery." Katherine's breath caught. "A nursery?" Beau's eyes met hers, serious yet hopeful. "I know you're older and maybe it's not possible, but I thought, if we were blessed that way." Katherine had not considered the possibility. At 38, nearly 39 now, she had assumed that chapter of life was closed to her. Yet here was Beau, planning for a family, wanting her children. "It might not happen," she cautioned, not wanting him to be disappointed. "I know, but if it does, I want to be ready." He squeezed her hand. "And if it doesn't, we'll find other ways to fill our home with love." That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Katherine allowed herself to imagine it a child with Beau's clear eyes and her auburn hair, a new generation for the ranch they were building together. "I would like that," she whispered, curling against his warmth. "A nursery. A family." Beau's arm tightened around her. "So would I. But Katherine, you should know you're already family enough for me. You're my heart." Spring brought renewed activity to the ranch. Beau implemented his expansion plans, purchasing additional cattle and hiring 2 more hands to help manage the growing herd. Katherine planted an extensive garden, determined to reduce their reliance on store-bought provisions. Their first wedding anniversary approached with the autumn leaves. Katherine, who had been feeling unusually tired for several weeks, finally visited the doctor in Wallace after Beau's concerned insistence. Dr. Williams, a kindly older man, confirmed what Katherine had begun to suspect but had hardly dared hope for. "You're with child, Mrs. Weston. I'd estimate about 3 months along." Katherine placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach. "But at my age, it's less common, certainly, but not unheard of. You're in good health, which is the most important factor. We'll need to monitor you closely, but there's every reason to expect a healthy pregnancy." She rode home in a daze, uncertain how to share the news with Beau. Would he be overjoyed? Concerned? The age gap between them had seemed to matter less as their marriage strengthened, but this development would highlight it anew. Beau was repairing a fence near the house when she returned. He straightened immediately, reading something in her expression. "Katherine, is everything all right?" She dismounted carefully, suddenly aware of the precious life she carried. "Everything is wonderful," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Beau, I'm going to have a baby, our baby." For a moment he stood perfectly still, hammer forgotten in his hand. Then he was moving, crossing the distance between them in long strides, gathering her gently in his arms. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "Katherine, that's miraculous. You're not worried about me being older?" He shook his head firmly. I trust Dr. Williams to take good care of you, and I trust you to tell me if anything doesn't feel right. His hand moved to rest reverently on her abdomen. We're having a baby. The news spread quickly through their small community. To Catherine's relief, the response was universally positive. Ellen Miller organized the women of nearby ranches to begin preparing baby clothes and blankets. Margaret Parker insisted that Catherine rest more and offered to send her daughter Ruth to help with household chores as the pregnancy progressed. Beau was transformed by the prospect of fatherhood. He threw himself into preparing the nursery, crafting a cradle from pine harvested from their own land, installing windows to catch the morning sun. At night, he would talk softly to Catherine's growing belly, sharing his hopes and plans for their child. I never had this, Catherine confessed one evening as they lay together. Even with Robert before the war, we talked of children someday, but it was always in the future after he returned. She placed Beau's hand on her stomach where the baby kicked vigorously. I never thought I would experience this miracle. You've given me so many gifts, Beau murmured. Your wisdom, your strength, and now this greatest gift of all. The pregnancy progressed well into the winter months. Dr. Williams expressed satisfaction with Catherine's health at each visit, though he insisted she rest more as her due date approached. Early February, by my calculations, he told them during a January checkup. Catherine found herself surrounded by care and attention that winter. The women of the community checked on her regularly. Beau adjusted his schedule to be near the house during the day, delegating more responsibilities to Sam and the other hands. I'm not an invalid, Catherine protested after finding Beau had done the laundry one morning. Humor me, he replied, kissing her forehead. I like taking care of you for a change. January brought heavy snowfall that isolated the ranch for days at a time. Catherine worried about the possibility of going into labor during a blizzard, but Beau had prepared for every contingency. He arranged for Ellen Miller, who had experience as a midwife, to stay in their spare room as the due date approached. He kept a sled ready to transport Catherine to town if weather permitted, and stockpiled medical supplies on Dr. Williams' recommendation. Labor began on a surprisingly mild February morning. Catherine woke Beau with a calm hand on his shoulder. It's time, she said simply. What followed was both the most challenging and most rewarding day of Catherine's life. Ellen's experienced guidance and Beau's unwavering support carried her through hours of labor. When the roads proved passable, Beau sent a ranch hand to fetch Dr. Williams, who arrived in time for the final stages. As dusk fell, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the room and their hearts. Dr. Williams placed the swaddled infant in Catherine's arms, his professional demeanor softening at the sight of the new family. A healthy boy, he announced. Strong lungs, good color. Beau sat beside Catherine on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he gazed at their child. He's perfect, he whispered. You're both perfect. They named him Robert Samuel Weston Robert, after Catherine's first love, a way of honoring her past while embracing their future, and Samuel for the foreman who had stood by Beau through difficult times. The birth of their son seemed to mark a turning point for the ranch as well. Spring brought favorable weather and strong markets for their expanded herd. Beau's careful management and Catherine's financial acumen resulted in their first truly profitable year. They paid off the last of the debt Beau had inherited and began setting aside money for future improvements. As Robert grew from infant to toddler, the bond between Beau and Catherine deepened further. Their age difference, once so concerning to Catherine, had become merely one aspect of their relationship rather than its defining feature. Beau's maturity had always belied his years, and Katherine found that motherhood had awakened a youthfulness in her that balanced them further. On warm evenings, they would sit on the porch swing, Robert sleeping peacefully between them, and plan their future together. The ranch would go to Robert someday, they agreed, but not before he had the education and experiences that would make him value it properly. "I want him to see more of the world than I have," Beau said, stroking his son's dark curls. "Maybe even college back east someday." Katherine smiled at the thought. "Your father's practicality and my love of learning, he'll be formidable." "Like his mother," Beau said, leaning over to kiss her softly. Robert's second winter brought an unexpected visit. Katherine was preparing supper while Beau played with their son on the floor near the hearth when a knock came at the door. Beau opened it to find a well-dressed older couple standing on the porch, snowflakes dusting their heavy coats. "Can I help you?" he asked, puzzled by the unfamiliar visitors. The woman stepped forward. "We're looking for Katherine Jenkins, or I suppose it would be Beau Weston now." Katherine appeared in the doorway behind Beau, Robert on her hip. "Margaret," she gasped, recognizing the woman from her Boston days. "Benjamin, what on earth? May we come in?" Margaret asked. "It's quite a story." Over hot coffee, the couple explained their presence. Margaret Davis had been the mother of Katherine's last charges in Boston. After her husband's death, she had remarried Benjamin Crawford, a business associate. They had spent years trying to locate Katherine after learning she had left her subsequent position. "When we heard you might be in Idaho Territory, we decided to combine business in Boise with a personal search," Benjamin explained. "The postmaster in Wallace directed us here." "But why search for me?" Katherine asked, bewildered by their appearance after so many years. Margaret reached for her hand. My first husband, made a provision for you in his will that was only recently discovered among his papers. He was grateful for your care of our children during difficult times. There's a substantial sum that rightfully belongs to you." The news was stunning. The substantial sum turned out to be an amount that would transform their financial situation entirely, allowing for improvements to the ranch that Beau had only dreamed of making. That night, after their visitors had been settled in the guest room and Robert put to bed, Beau and Katherine sat before the fire, still processing the day's events. "It changes everything," Beau said, his expression thoughtful. "And nothing at the same time." Katherine understood his meaning perfectly. The money would make their lives easier, would secure Robert's future, would allow them to expand the ranch beyond what they had thought possible. But it wouldn't change what mattered most: the love they had built, the family they had created, the partnership they had forged. "You remember what you said when we first met?" she asked, taking his hand. "When I told you I was 15 years older." Beau smiled, the firelight catching the laugh lines that had begun to form around his eyes. "Then you can teach me how to love right," he quoted. "Best words I ever spoke." Katherine leaned her head against his shoulder. "I came here thinking I was too old for love, too old for motherhood, too old to start again. You taught me that it's never too late for any of those things." "We taught each other," Beau corrected gently. "Every day we still do." Outside, snow fell softly on the ranch they had built together, no longer just Beau's inheritance, but their shared creation, a legacy for their son and any future children they might be blessed with. The age between them had become meaningless in the face of what they had achieved together. Katherine Weston, once Katherine Jenkins, mail-order bride 15 years older than her husband, had found what she had never dared hope for: not just a home of her own, but a love that transcended convention, a family that celebrated her strengths, and a future limited only by their shared dreams. As spring returned to Wallace, Idaho Territory, the Weston ranch flourished. The unexpected inheritance allowed Beau to implement improvements that transformed their operation into one of the most successful in the region. They added a modern irrigation system for the south pastures, expanded the barn, and built a new bunkhouse for the additional hands they now employed. Katherine, with her practical mind and Eastern education, convinced Beau to diversify their interests. They purchased shares in Wallace's growing mining operations and established a small breeding program for quality horses, combining Beau's knowledge of ranching with Katherine's head for business. Their son Robert thrived, a sturdy 3-year-old with his father's sandy hair and his mother's thoughtful nature. Katherine had worried initially that being an older mother would limit her ability to keep up with an active child, but she found instead that Robert brought energy into her life, his curiosity and wonder reawakening her own. In the summer of Robert's 3rd year, Katherine made an announcement that stunned Beau as thoroughly as her first pregnancy had. "Dr. Williams confirmed it yesterday," she said, unable to contain her smile. "We're having another baby, in winter, just like Robert." Beau's expression transformed from shock to delight. At 27, he had matured into a man whose confidence and capability commanded respect throughout the territory. Yet in that moment, his boyish excitement made Katherine fall in love with him all over again. "I didn't think. I assumed Robert was our miracle," he said, drawing her close. "Apparently miracles can happen twice," she replied, resting her head against his chest. The community celebrated with them. The Millers, the Parkers, and the other ranching families who had become their extended family shared in their joy. Even the unexpected Eastern visitors, the Crawfords, who had maintained correspondence with Katherine since their visit, sent congratulatory telegrams and gifts from Boston. This pregnancy proved more challenging than her first. At 43, Katherine found herself more easily fatigued. Dr. Williams insisted on more frequent checkups and prescribed additional rest, which Katherine reluctantly accepted after Beau's worried insistence. "The ranch won't fall apart if you take an afternoon nap," he told her firmly. "Robert and I will manage." Katherine often found herself watching Beau with their son teaching him to ride his first pony, showing him how to feed the chickens, reading to him from the growing library they had established in what had once been a rarely used sitting room. The tenderness between father and son brought tears to her eyes, especially when she considered how different Robert's childhood was from Beau's, surrounded by love and stability, rather than marked by early loss and responsibility. The second baby arrived during a December snowstorm that made travel impossible. Ellen Miller's midwifery skills were put to full use as she guided Katherine through a labor more difficult than her first. "A daughter," Ellen announced as dawn broke, placing the tiny bundle in Katherine's exhausted arms. "A beautiful little girl." Beau, who had remained by Katherine's side throughout the long night despite Ellen's attempts to banish him to the waiting area, reached out a trembling hand to touch his daughter's cheek. "She's so small," he whispered. "But strong," Ellen assured him. "Listen to those lungs." They named her Margaret Eleanor Weston Margaret for their Boston visitor, who had changed their fortunes, and Eleanor for Beau's mother. Little Maggie, as they called her, was a delicate beauty with Katherine's auburn hair and a determined spirit that became apparent from her earliest days. "She's like you," Beau observed one evening as Katherine rocked their fussing daughter. "She knows exactly what she wants." Katherine smiled tiredly, "and like you, she doesn't give up until she gets it." The adjustment to 2 children brought new challenges. Robert, accustomed to being the center of attention, required reassurance and special time with each parent. Katherine found herself stretched thin between caring for a newborn, giving Robert the attention he needed, and maintaining the household. Beau proved himself an equal partner in parenthood. He took Robert on man-to-man outings to give Katherine time with the baby, changed diapers without complaint, and rose for night feedings so Katherine could rest. "You don't have to do all this," Katherine told him one night as he walked the floor with a colicky Maggie. "Yes, I do," he replied simply. "We're partners, remember, in everything." As their children grew, so did the ranch. The Weston name became synonymous with quality livestock and fair business practices. Beau's innovative breeding program produced cattle particularly well suited to the harsh Idaho climate, while Katherine's financial management ensured their growing wealth was invested wisely. Robert started school in Wallace at age 6, riding in with Beau or one of the hands each morning when weather permitted. His quick mind and eagerness to learn made him a favorite with his teachers, while his practical ranch experience gave him confidence among his peers. "He's got the best of both worlds," Beau said proudly after a parent-teacher meeting. "Book learning and real-world knowledge." Maggie, 3 years younger and utterly fearless, was determined to follow her brother in everything. By the time she was 5, she could ride almost as well as Robert, knew all the ranch hands by name, and had charmed the entire community with her spirited personality and quick wit. "She's going to be a handful when she's older," Ellen Miller predicted with a knowing smile. "She's a handful now," Katherine replied, watching her daughter attempt to lasso a fence post with a piece of rope she'd commandeered from the barn. The years passed with the rhythm of ranch life, springs full of new calves and fresh growth, summers of hard work and abundant harvests, autumns of cattle drives and preparation, winters of close family time around the hearth. On Katherine's 50th birthday, Beau organized a surprise celebration that brought together everyone who had become important in their lives over the past 12 years. The ranch house overflowed with friends and neighbors. Robert, now 9, played host with surprising maturity, while 6-year-old Maggie entertained everyone with her spirited piano playing, the result of lessons from one of Wallace's few music teachers. Late that evening, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Beau led Katherine to the porch where they had spent so many evenings together. "Happy birthday," he said, presenting her with a small wooden box. Inside was a gold locket. When she opened it, she found a tiny photograph of their family on one side and an inscription on the other. "To Katherine, who taught me how to love right. Forever, Beau." Tears filled her eyes. "It's perfect." "So are you," he said, taking her hands in his. At 35, Beau had matured into a handsome man, respected throughout the territory. The boyish rancher was still visible in his smile, but experience and responsibility had added depth to his character. 12 years ago, you stepped off that stagecoach, terrified I'd reject you because of your age. Do you remember?" Katherine nodded. "Those anxious moments seem to belong to another lifetime now. I thank God every day that you had the courage to come west, that you answered my advertisement, that you gave me a chance." He brushed a strand of silver-streaked auburn hair from her face. "I promised to be a good husband to you. Have I kept that promise?" "Beyond anything I could have imagined," she assured him. "You've given me everything I ever wanted: a home, a family, a purpose. But most of all, you've given me love when I thought that part of my life was over." Beau drew her close. "It will never be over, not as long as I have breath in my body." As they stood together under the vast Idaho sky, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, from an uncertain meeting between a young rancher and an older mail order bride to the deep, enduring partnership they now shared. The 15 years between them had never disappeared, but they had ceased to matter in any meaningful way. What remained was the family they had built, the love they had nurtured, and the life they continued to create together. In the years that followed, the Weston ranch prospered further. Robert, following in his father's footsteps, but with his mother's love of learning, attended college in Denver before returning to help manage the expanding family business. Maggie, determined and independent, surprised everyone by studying medicine in San Francisco, eventually returning to Wallace as one of its first female physicians. Beau and Katherine remained the heart of it all, partners in every sense, their love deepening with each passing year, their age difference long forgotten in the rich life they had created together. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the work was done and they sat together on the porch of the home they had built, Beau would still reach for her hand and say, with a gleam in his eye, "Teach me something, Mrs. Weston." And Katherine would smile, remembering that first day and the words that had changed her life. "Then you can teach me how to love right." It turned out they had taught each other about love, about partnership, about creating a life that transcended convention and expectation. Their story, unconventional as it had begun, had become one of the great love stories of Wallace, Idaho Territory, a testament to the truth that love recognizes no boundaries of age or circumstance when two hearts find their perfect match.